Chapter 18, February 16th, 1943, Lodz Ghetto. Sometimes in the middle of the night, shots were fired in the street. I bolted right up, immediately wide awake, as were Esther and the other teens in this apartment. Sarah must have been acting as a lookout while we slept, for she burst into the room and shut the door behind her. "It's a raid!" Her eyes shifted to me, and something pinched in my chest. They had to be looking for me and Esther. Either the Schmalkalnik who took my sack turned it in, or the OD reported us. Patrolling soldiers would have found the gap between the fence where we entered the ghetto. They knew we were here, somewhere. "We need to leave the ghetto," I said, looking around the room. "Help us." "There are no ways out," Abraham said. "It's amazing you got in, but they'll be even more vigilant now at the gates." "There's always a way out," I insisted. "Weak places where the wood has decayed or the brick has been chipped away, gaps where the children sneak in and out to smuggle food, or Lodz doesn't have those places anymore. That's why it's amazing you're here. There's no smuggling in Lodz, no sneaking. There are no holes." More shots were fired out in the street. If we could not escape, then we had to hide. But I wouldn't ask Abraham for help. His punishment for hiding us would extend beyond cruelty. While Esther scrambled to put her boots back on, I asked, "Is there any way out of this apartment other than the door?" "There's a fire escape out the back window," Sarah offered. "I'll show them." Henrik led us out of the apartment into the hallway, across a rickety floor, and around a corner. At the end of that hallway, I lifted the back window to access the fire escape. He whispered, "I know a way out of the ghetto, but it'll be very dangerous." "Where?" "There's a munitions factory a few blocks from here, on the south end of the ghetto. If you can find a way into the basement, a window straight ahead will take you outside the ghetto walls." "Come with us," I offered. "Please, if 2 of us can get out, then 3 of us can get out." His brow pressed together, as if he was considering my words. I felt desperate for him to accept my offer, for there to have been one good thing about us coming here. But then he glanced back at the apartment where his other friends remained. "No, God expects us to have faith." I wasn't giving up yet, but doesn't he also expect us to act according to our faith? Footsteps pounded the floor below us. They were coming up the stairs. "That's what I'm doing," Henrik whispered. "Go, I'll distract them as long as I can." Esther went out the window first and I followed, but Henrik hadn't yet shut the window before a bullet caught him from behind. He fell forward across the windowsill, and I pulled Esther with me against the building wall, where we wouldn't be seen. She had covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. "Don't look," I whispered, trying to block her view from Henrik's still body. A second later, we heard Abraham's apartment door being forced open, banging against the back wall. Heavy footsteps followed. "No," Esther whispered. "Chaya, no." The words had barely fallen from her lips when Abraham and Sarah shouted, "Shema Israel," the first 2 words of our daily prayer, meaning, "Hear, O Israel." They got no further before gunfire echoed in the apartment. I let out a silent scream of my own, pain rippling through me. Abraham, Sarah, and Henrik had taken those bullets as proof of their devotion to God, and so that we could escape. I hoped God would hear their words. I certainly heard them. I just didn't understand them anymore. Tears blinded me as I followed Esther down the fire escape. We had to be quiet, but it was equally important to be quick. We were far too visible up here. The only thing masking the sound of our feet upon the metal was the one thing I wished it wasn't. Gunfire on the streets, followed inevitably by wails of pain and suffering. The next shots ended with silence, which meant something far worse. This kind of escape was new for me, and horrible. The gunshots and loud cries for mercy were saving my life. The silence threatened it. I was surviving only because others were dying. A choking sob rose in me, but I couldn't let it out, not here and not in front of Esther. I shoved it down, all of it, ignoring the guilt for trying to live while others around me were dying. The pain for coming here in the first place and inciting tonight's action. The confusion because I wanted to kill the people who were killing my people, and I didn't understand how anyone could say that was wrong or that it dishonored God. But maybe it did. We reached the ground and immediately hid within the shadows of night. The snow had mostly stopped falling, but dark clouds covered what might have been a bright moon. If only it were too dark to see the violence spreading like a cancer across this ghetto. People were being herded into the street right in front of us, ordered to stand in lines. We'd run on by them, keeping to the shadows, but I still heard the shots, each echo like a fist to my gut, and the inevitable, awful silence. "This is the factory." Esther grabbed my arm, bringing me back into the moment. Somehow, she'd kept her senses together to find this building, even as my own attention wandered into despair and hopelessness. I'd need her help just now. I'd needed her help just now. I had needed her, still needed her, and she needed me to pay attention. Hearing footsteps back on the street, I pulled Esther against the wall of the munitions factory and hoped that whoever was coming didn't aim their flashlight into our direction. Lights bounced in rhythm with their run, waving back and forth. They were still searching, and they'd continue searching until they found something to justify this action. I took Esther's hand and realized that hers was shaking again. In a strange way, this comforted me because it was familiar and because I knew Esther needed me to be strong and brave and bold enough to guide us through the factory. The flashlights were coming closer, but just when it seemed they might swing toward us, a call was barked out, and the men holding them turned down a different street. This was our chance. As quietly as possible, we trudged through the snow toward the back of the brick building, looking for any way in, a door we could test, or a window. We found a couple of each, but everything was locked or closed. Up there, Esther pointed to a window over our heads, slightly open but too high to reach on our own. A tree was nearby, sturdy at its base, but the branches looked brittle, as if the slightest pressure might cause them to collapse. "They'll hold my weight," Esther whispered. "I don't know if you," Esther spoke more firmly. "I can get into that window, Shia. Help me, then wait by the last door we passed." I wasn't sure if she was right, but I was absolutely sure what would happen if we didn't at least try. I locked my fingers together and made her a step, and then, when I had her foot, I lifted it as high as I could. The branches would be cold and slippery with ice, but there was nothing I could do for her once she was in the tree. She shinnied along the limbs, moving from the thicker one to the thinner branches above, and the thinner ones still that were near the open window. She gripped one branch with her right hand, while with her left she pried the window open wider. It moved, but only a little. Even if I had climbed the tree, I'd never have made it through the window's narrow gap. She released her right hand, and I gasped. Certainly she was falling, but she held on to the frame with both hands and wiggled her body inside. Just in time, too. More soldiers ran down the street, passing me on their way to another part of the ghetto. My mind raced. If they came back this way, when they came back, their lights would aim toward my side of the building. I needed to be inside before then. I tried to estimate how far to the factory floor Esther would have to fall after she was inside. Could she manage that distance? Would there be any light inside to help her navigate the fall? What if she was injured in there? I glanced down at my hands, clasped together near my chest. They were shaking violently. This level of fear was so unfamiliar to me that I didn't entirely understand it anymore. I'd spent so long accepting my death that I'd forgotten how very much I wanted to live. I wanted to live, and for now, I was still there, as was Esther, and I wanted it to remain that way. After the soldiers passed, I retraced my steps to the door. I gave it another gentle tug in case Esther had already opened it, but it was still locked. A minute passed and nothing happened. Another minute passed, and another. Was I at the right door? Had she gotten disoriented inside the factory? I tried the door again, but it was still locked. Where was she? The shooting resumed. Somewhere in the distance, the cries of the victims were dimming. Where was Esther? Chapter 19. February 16th, 1943, Lodz Ghetto. After several minutes, I remembered a pin in my hair. I'd never picked a lock before, but I needed to try. It was better than waiting out here, increasingly anxious for what was happening to Esther inside the factory. I pulled it out and straightened it. But before I could stick it in the keyhole, the handle twisted and Esther was at the other side of the open door. "Get in, quick," she whispered. As soon as she closed the door behind us, I asked, "Are you alone here?" "I think so." "Are you hurt?" "No." Then I was free to get angry. "I imagined all sorts of horrible things happened to you. What took so long? Look, I ruined my hairpin." She stared at me for a moment, trying very hard to care about the pin. Trying too hard. A smile tugged at her mouth, and soon I was smiling too, forgetting how furious I was, and only overwhelmed with relief that she was okay. But gunfire echoed outside the factory again, and I remembered there was nothing to smile about in here. Esther and I locked eyes. Then she said, "I looked around before I opened the door. I wanted to make sure I wasn't leading you into a trap. I found the stairs into the basement." "Then what are you waiting for?" She led me through the maze of long metal tables covered with tools and parts of weapons, and large wooden crates between them. My eyes weren't fully adjusted to the darkness in here, but I saw enough to know we were surrounded by a whole arsenal of weapons. For a while, Akiva had focused on breaking into munitions factories near Cacao to sabotage the weapons ready for shipment. The cell assigned to that task would bend the firing pins, or stuff salt into the barrels, or do whatever it took to ensure the weapons would be useless on the lines. But their mission was eventually changed. It turned out those who were forced to labor in the munitions factory were already doing plenty of sabotaging the weapons when they could, another form of resistance. But I doubted that was happening here. The Judenrat had its thumb too firmly on these people. Anyone cruel enough to send an entire ghetto's children away to their death certainly would not hesitate to quash even the smallest of rebellions.